Hi, welcome to Tales of Dread. Tonight we have some true horror stories about skinwalkers, so beware of what lurks beneath. Enjoy and don't forget to like, share and subscribe. I'm going to tell you this story as best I can remember it. This happened to me when I was about 17 years old, at the end of 1991 or the beginning of 1992. At the time, I was working for a company that provided security services on a contract basis to several businesses around and on the Navajo reservation. My contract required me to travel from one place to another. They were in two different parts of the reservation itself. This meant that I spent about 75% of my time traveling north to south or at a Window Rock, Arizona, night. After stopping at one place and making sure it was safe with another security officer who had arrived there around midnight, I would head north toward Peach Springs, Arizona, where my next stop was near the Grand Canyon Caverns. When I left the parking lot near the Grand Canyon Caverns, I would turn right onto Arizona Highway 64 and head east toward Belmont. There are only three things about my drive from Peach Springs to Belmont that are worth mentioning. First, there is a spot where the road curves slightly and there used to be a sign telling me about the road ahead. I think that sign said something like conditions not checked or conditions get worse as you go. That's how far away these places were. There was no radio station along the way with news updates, and cell service was almost non-existent, with only occasional coverage. We stopped at places near bigger towers like Tuba City and Coyenta during our 8-hour on, 8-hour off shift changes. Second, I usually see or hear herds of wild horses running away from me for most of my drive. And third, there was always a place to my left with a thick canopy. Outside, it looks like it's pitch black. But all of a sudden, in the middle of all this darkness, I saw something big, dark, and moving that didn't look like a person or an animal. From what everyone said, including other security officers who were also in the area and people who were interviewed by law enforcement, it seemed like a strange thing. It seemed like people who saw this being said they saw either a hairy man or an animal-like thing that was covered in hair. Two security officers who saw it say they saw one thing, but a third says they saw something completely different. This is different from the other reports, which mostly say that people saw either a humanoid or something that looks like a beast. I've seen the first two, and this one wasn't any better. The matter at hand. Start with me driving on Highway 64 through an area where there was no light except for maybe my headlights. Suddenly, I saw this strange dark thing right in front of me that looked like it was crossing the road as it moved toward me. I remember wondering what it was, and as it got closer, I could see more of its shape, but it didn't look like a person or an animal. I've never seen anything like it in my whole life. Yes, I thought the creature from the Black Lagoon looked exactly like this because it moved in a way that reminded me of a fish. It was a dark, gray color, and the texture of its skin made me think of wet leather. The only thing that seemed to be an eye was what looked like a pupil. The eyes looked like solid white orbs that were more reflective than expressive. Its arms were longer than any arms a human had ever seen, and they seemed to reach down past its knees. Its legs looked deformed, with muscular thighs and skinny calves that didn't fit together well. Not exactly like a human's or an ape's, but a strange mix of the two. Not to mention that it looks like a strange creature and has a strange head. It was big and round, and its nose was long. It was kind of like a sea creature, but it looked a lot like a person or an ape. I know that sounds strange, but I've never seen anything like this before, and I don't know how to describe it. I could tell you, though, that its ears were small and flat against the side of its head. Neither an ape nor any other animal had ever seen ears like that. The creature's face was suddenly lit up by the headlights of another car coming from behind me. That was the angle that was caught. It only showed me a little bit. And in the light, I saw something that shocked me even more than this being's appearance. This thing had fangs like the ones you see on vampires in movies and TV shows. This is what it made me think of. Two long and big fangs or teeth that stick out over its bottom lip. I would get goosebumps all over my body. I was scared whether or not it could see me. I'm not sure. But this thing's eyes were always on me, and its mouth was slightly open to show its front teeth. Did I say that this thing happened very quickly? Well, about 15 minutes after leaving Page on the way to Tuba City along Highway 160, where the only thing between Page and Tuba is a huge Navajo reservation, we stopped at a gas station. Also at that time, I looked out my passenger window to the west side of the road and saw something big and dark moving through the darkness. But this thing didn't look at all like the other one. It looked more like a man running barefoot in the dark, with his arms swinging back and forth. This one looked like it had long hair, but that was about all I could see, even in the dark. It stopped right in the middle of the road and turned its head to look right at me. As soon as I looked at this thing, my stomach turned inside out. I'll never forget how this thing looked when it looked back at me through the window. It was less than 10 feet away on a lonely stretch of Highway 160. It seems like it was trying to scare me and see what I would do in response. The whole thing was so strange that I felt like I was outside of my body watching it all happen in front of me. Just as I was about to hit it, it darted across the road, and disappeared into the night and darkness. All of this happened in a very short amount of time, but it felt like time had stopped. After I drove by, I felt like I could control my whole body again. So I drove a few more miles before I pulled over to the side of the road. This thing was going to follow me because I was so scared. I felt sick, like I was going to puke. I sat there in the dark with my car running for about 5 to 10 minutes just trying to catch my breath and let everything sink in. I wasn't sure what I had seen with these two beings, but I was sure they weren't people, at least not normal people. Both of them walk on two legs, and the way they moved through the dark made me think they were out at night to try to get somewhere, but I don't know where. None of this really makes sense. And for weeks after this huge event, I didn't know if I ever wanted to tell anyone about it because I was sure they would think I was crazy. But I have to talk about it for some reason. So, I'm here today to tell you about what happened to me on August 5, 2002, around midnight on Highway 160, and about the other creature I saw. I know a few people who live very close to this area, and they have also heard strange stories about seeing things that don't make sense. This is the only thing I know about the story. I'll never forget that night, and I'm sure that whatever was out there knows who I am and when it's going to strike next. I was just leaving my girlfriend's house. Just before the pandemic, this happened. I was driving through her neighborhood when I saw something white in the middle of the street. It looked like a mix between a dog and a wolf. But it was much bigger than anything else I've seen. I gave it gas because I wanted it to move out of the way, but instead it just looked up at me with its black, beady eyes and didn't move an inch. It didn't show any fear when a car came toward it. I had just finished reading George Knapp and Cole Keller's Skinwalker Ranch. They said that these things could change shape, so that can't be what was going on. The thing looked more like a wolf than anything else. It had sharp ears all over its head. On top of that, this thing ran faster than any wolf. Let's not forget that it had two legs and stood up. Now I'm scared. Even just thinking about it now, it was huge and taller than the top of my car. Its eyes were sunken deep into its skull, making it look like a skeleton, and its skin looked like it had been there for a long time. As I said, This thing did not look normal at all, and it shouldn't even exist or be alive. Nothing that looks like a person should be built that way. It was really creepy to look at for a few seconds. The only thing that came to mind right away was the stories I've heard about Mothman, but Mothman doesn't live here and is something completely different. But I guess it's the fear that you're dealing with something bad and unknown, even though this thing didn't move completely out of the way. It moved just enough so that my car could pass, and then it stood right next to the road and looked at me as I drove by. Even when I look back in my rearview mirror, I can still see that it never takes its eyes off my car. Even though I was moving away, it seemed like this thing wanted me to know. It was looking at me and studying me like a predator does when it plans how to catch its prey. Getting ready to act when the time is right. I won't be shy about saying that the second I drove after this thing, I slammed on the gas pedal and broke the speed limit. I drove away as quickly as my little Honda could go. This thing I saw is not alive in any way that we know of on Earth. It just broke all of our laws and the laws of physics. I think this is some kind of shapeshifter or maybe a skinwalker. I've never dealt with anything like this before, so any help, supplies, or advice would be appreciated. Late at night, I was driving home in a very rural area north of El Paso, Texas. It looked like it was in the road in front of me when I saw it. So I stopped my car and tried to slow down to get a better look. What it was, I don't know, but I can tell you now. This thing wasn't human. It looked like it had greenish skin with scales, and it didn't pay any attention to me at first. Instead, it just walked past me and into the desert brush, heading toward El Paso Hill Country Park. As soon as it went into the brush, I put my foot down and drove away quickly. I always have a gun on me in case something like this happens, but I hope I never have to use it. I'm also very grateful that you never turned around and tried to find me. I don't know for sure what it was, but I don't think it could have been any kind of normal animal. Do I think it was a skinwalker? I'm not sure. Even though it was scary, it did look a little bit like a cartoon. Almost makes me wonder what kind of being it could have been. So, I have no idea. The only thing I know for sure is that it wasn't a dog. If it had been, it would have looked very different. And dogs don't walk around on their back legs like this one did. For the record, my name is Robert, and I have no reason or way to make this up. My husband just got home from working a late night shift. I'm sending this to you anonymously for your records and for anyone else you want to tell. He pulls up to the house and says that someone is walking around in the backyard. I've got to go get my gun. When my husband looks at the security footage on his phone, he can see a tall, skinny person with long, skinny arms slowly walking to the back side of the yard. But its head looked like it was level with the rest of it as it kind of glided and almost hovered above the ground. It didn't do anything but look straight ahead. It looked strange and kind of like a stick figure man covered in animal skins, if that makes sense. From the way the video looked, it was very hard to tell what we were seeing. My husband said he'd seen it, even though it didn't make much sense. We're both very scared by what we saw, and my husband thinks it was a skinwalker. Again, as I've said, it was an unknown tall, thin figure with long arms and legs that walked through the backyard as if it were hovering or gliding. That looked like it didn't care if anyone saw it because it seemed to just stare straight ahead. After a while, both my husband and I were very upset by what we had seen on the video. There's also something important about the fact that this happened on a reservation, where skinwalkers are often seen near or even on tribal land. This would make sense, though, because of old Navajo stories about skinwalkers, but the figure was never seen close to or in contact with other people or things. How do you feel? Tell me in the comments section below. If you have anything to say about the sighting or possible explanations that could help us figure out what it was, that would be very helpful. Well, try your best to answer your comment. Thank you to everyone who reads this, and keep your eyes open for more chances to meet people. God bless. The desert at night is a very strange place. Sometimes it's hard to know if what you see is real or not, but something made me get out of my car and follow it. I felt like I was in a trance or that an odd force was pulling me. I've been to a lot of different states and seen a lot of strange things, but nothing could have prepared me for what I saw, especially since it was right next to the interstate when I was driving from Northern California to Southern Arizona. At one point, I had to stop for gas, and I also needed to take a break. The trip took a long time and was very tiring. I went to get a cup of coffee and was about to leave when I saw this tall, white figure. It looked like a deformed lizard with a long tail, but it didn't have any hair on its body. Like if you crossed a sloth with a lizard or something. No matter what it was, it looked very strange. I don't know why I didn't say anything at first, but maybe it's because I'm not good at getting into fights or coming up with plans on the spot. So, instead of doing something that might have saved me from whatever it was going to do next, I just stood there and watched it move toward the desert. When I saw this, I was very confused and scared, even though I didn't feel like I was in danger right away. So I did it without giving it a second thought. I found myself on the other side of my car, heading toward where it just disappeared into the night. I thought, or maybe I didn't think, but I was sure that if I followed it, I might find out what it was. I quickly realized how stupid this was, though. Because before I could even go after it, this thing jumped out right in front of me, as if it knew I was going to follow its tracks, and believe me, it did not want to be followed. It jumps up and stands straight in front of me. But because it was still in the darkness of the night, I couldn't see its face very well. But I could see that its two eyes were glowing red, and it moved toward me so I could see more of its face. Just looking at its face gave me the chills. It didn't look like it had a nose or ears at all. Instead, there were just two slits where they should have been. This made it look like the creature had a strange genetic disorder that made it misshapen. Its face reminded me of a burn victim's face, but it looked even worse, much more demonic and evil. It showed me its teeth by opening its mouth and kind of grinning at me. Its teeth looked more like shark's teeth, and it just slowly moved toward me. Now I was frozen because I was afraid I couldn't move. I had no choice but to sit there and watch this thing come toward me. I probably would have died if I hadn't done what I was about to do. This thing starts to reach out to grab me, but before I can do that, I can only think of one thing to do: start praying out loud. As soon as I do that, this thing stops and looks at me like, "What are you doing?" And its face goes from a smile to one of horror, and it quickly moves away into the darkness. Of course, this didn't happen right away. Maybe over the course of 10 or 20 seconds, my sense of time is probably off, but it wasn't instant. Whatever I did or said made it realize that maybe eating me right then and there wasn't the best idea, and it ran away into the night in the desert. I got up pretty quickly, and it felt like I was no longer under its spell. I just want to quickly say something. You might hear my story and think it's just another stupid scary story or some cheap creepypasta written by a 15-year-old want-to-be. But I'm telling you, as soon as I saw this thing, even though I was scared, it made me feel like I was under some kind of spell and I had to follow it into the night, even though common sense would tell you that's a bad idea. But I wasn't ruled by a normal sense of fear. It's as if something got me out of my car and told me to go after it. Follow it over and over again. It's like an instinct, and at that moment, it made sense to try to follow this thing. The same urge that makes you move when you're hungry, need to sleep, or want to have babies. That's the only way I can think of to explain how I feel and why I feel that way. But as soon as I prayed and it went away, it was like the spell it had cast on me was broken completely. I haven't really heard of stories like this before, but I'm going to tell you mine, and this is usually what happened next. I decided to go straight to a hotel or try to rest and get myself back together. So, this is basically what happened when I met what I think was a skinwalker or something from the demonic realm. Even though there are rumors about whether or not these things exist, I can tell you that when you see something like this, it changes the way you think. It makes you realize that there are probably skinwalkers out there and that they are much more dangerous than you think. Since skinwalkers are based on black magic, it makes sense that they would cast some kind of spell on you to make them follow you. I'm just trying to make sense of what happened to me, but I'd love to hear your thoughts. Do everything you can to keep these things from happening. This is a story that my great-grandfather told me and that I'm going to tell you. My great-grandfather grew up in the Choctaw tribe, and he always told me about a man in the village who did black magic. This man was kicked out of the village when his practices were discovered, but he swore to the whole village and told everyone that he would come back and haunt the village in life and in death, and he has kept his promise. The man not only used black magic, but he was also a skinwalker, a shapeshifter, and a servant of the night. He would come back and kidnap children and some of the village's women, and he would curse and hex many of the tribe's members, even causing one of the elders to get sick and die suddenly. After only a few days, a small group of warriors set out to find this skinwalker or man. They had a pretty good idea of where he was. The story goes that when these 4 soldiers who were also Choctaw warriors found the skinwalker, he changed into a huge wolf creature and killed 2 of them right away. The other 2 warriors tried to fight him off, but he killed one of them while the other 2 ran for their lives. The last warrior made it back to the tribe and told everyone what had happened and how dangerous this man was. Within a few weeks, he too would get sick suddenly and die within a few days. People then thought that the winter had killed the skinwalker, but it was too cold and that the man had frozen to death. But his spirit came back to curse the village even more, and it wasn't until years later, when my great-grandfather was a young man, that a medicine man in the village put up wards all over to protect the village and keep this evil skinwalker's spirit energy away, which seemed to work for a while. But after that, it seemed like the skinwalker's spirit energy just got more and more spread out. Still, bad things did happen. They all think that more and more people were cursed, but as time went on, it became less obvious, life got easier, and everyone forgot about this skinwalker. I just want to say that my great-grandfather told me this a long time ago, before he died. He died when he was 101 years old. He was a very healthy and smart old man, and I've always found this story very interesting because it happened around the time I became very interested in skinwalkers. I hope you liked his story, and you are welcome to tell your audience about it. Peace be with you. As far as I know, this is no longer happening. But about 5 of these things were very busy a few years ago. I think it started when people found dead animals or couldn't find them. Then, the people who were found camping in the woods had also disappeared. I think this was going on at my grandparents' house because it was built on top of an old Indian graveyard. There was a different vibe there. Every night around midnight, the ghosts were very active. You could hear them banging on the walls inside the house, running footsteps outside, and heavy breathing near the front door and windows. Even though the activity seemed to stop for good around evening, it would start up again at night. We all can't wait to see my uncle when he comes home one day. We kids all go play hide and seek in the backyard, near these big willow trees, to celebrate. They may be more than 300 years old. As soon as everyone had found a place to hide, the first person counting saw something move out of the corner of their eyes. They quickly turned around, hoping to see someone or something, but there was nothing close by. Everyone in the military seemed to like the brightest day, which had a bluish tint and then went dark. It probably only lasted a few seconds, but it felt like an eternity when my older cousin, who was counting, yelled, "Stop, stop." Everyone runs back to where my uncle is, and they all have scared looks on their faces. My aunt gets very angry and starts asking for an explanation. They tell her what they saw over by the trees, and she looks at them like they're crazy. But the uncle and all the kids playing up and down said they saw something that looked like a man but wasn't watching them. They said it was covered in animal skins and had big black eyes, and that it turned around and walked into a bright blue light, or what we think was a portal. This would explain why all the trees around it lit up bright blue and then disappeared. My uncle thought it was a portal based on how the light was shining on it, where it walked, and how it seemed to just turn around and disappear with the light. My aunt did not believe us at first, but she eventually saw the light. She tried to ignore it and act like they were just making it up. In the end, she said, "Well, I guess we should try to make up a better story and figure out something else." I think there are definitely spirits here, and I wouldn't be surprised if we really did see something from another world come through a portal right where those willow trees are. I will say, though, that the place where it went missing, near those very old village trees, feels very strange. When you go over there, you feel colder and like you're being watched all the time. It's hard to put into words, but it makes you feel uncomfortable. We don't really play over there because of a reason. It just doesn't feel right. I was at my old apartment in Denver, Colorado, when I saw a very large, hairy animal that looked like a wolf standing up. It then ran into a thicket and was gone. When I was outside smoking a cigarette, the sky was very gray, dark, and smoky. It was pretty early in the morning before I had to go to work, and I could see it in the distance. It was staring at me, and I could see its glowing red eyes, but then it turned and went away. I'm shocked and can't believe it. I thought it might be a coyote, but it didn't run away like a coyote or any other normal animal would. One thing I do remember, though, is that right after I saw it, even though I was smoking a cigarette, which stinks, as we all know, I smelled a strong sulfur smell. It stuck around longer than cigarette smoke. I know a lot about skinwalkers and know that they exist and what they do. So that's the only logical explanation, but I don't know much about Native American mythology, so I hope someone can find some answers for me. I only know about the native culture in Colorado, and the states around it, but I'm sure they have their own folk tales and legends as well. I would also like to say that it took me a good minute or two to really understand what I was seeing. It didn't look like it moved or got on all fours at any point during this whole sighting. From what I could tell, it moved very easily on two legs. Even had hawks like a dog, but from the way it looked, it moved very human-like or very much like a man. I don't even know if it ever went all the way down to 4. So, I've been trying to do some research, but I can't find many stories about skinwalkers with which to compare what I saw. The town where this takes place is also not very big. So I would guess that the skinwalker was just passing through or something. Maybe hundreds are hiding behind every corner. I don't know for sure. I can also tell you that I was fully awake, even though it was early in the morning. I didn't feel drunk. I hadn't drank or taken any drugs. Well, besides a cigarette and nicotine. But nicotine won't help you understand this. This was not yet a nightmare or a bad dream. I think this is either a bad spirit or a spirit creature that can move around in the real world. A skinwalker. One thing I do know is that a lot of UFOs have been seen in this area as a whole. I'm not sure how that relates to what I saw that night. But it's worth looking into. I've seen quite a few, but I can't say anything about aliens or little green men because I haven't seen them. Strange lights and things have been seen in the sky by many people in town, including many friends, family members, and accomplices that I know and talk to. I guess I'll have to keep looking for answers, or else I'll have to write this off as just another one of life's mysteries. But I'm pretty sure that what I saw was real and not something I made up. Even though the whole thing was over in less than 10 seconds, I will remember it for the rest of my life. A few years ago, my friends and I decided to take a trip to Las Vegas to see Roswell, the famous site where a UFO crashed. It was really cool to get there by car. Between Roswell and Las Vegas, there is a long stretch of road. Either way, you can see for miles. So, as we drove down the road for about 20 minutes, we saw a dead dog lying on the side of the road. We joked that maybe it was a stray dog or something that one of those black panthers out here in the desert killed. Whatever it wasn't normal. I don't know what kind of animal has grayish-black fur all over its body, but it was a big one. We parked right next to the UFO crash site, which, as far as I can remember, was just a bunch of dirt piles with some trash thrown around. There wasn't much to see. So we got out to stretch our legs, but then this man came up to us and told us not to move until we figured out which way we were facing. He says we need to be careful and make sure we're not facing north so we don't end up in Canada or worse. We were like, is this guy on drugs? What on earth? The guy was crazy and started talking about skinwalkers or something incoherent. Then he started talking about how he was possessed and how he had seen the devil. He then kind of ran off and started ranting and babbling under his breath. We're kind of scared of him because he's weird and seems to be crazy. So, as we were getting in our car to leave, he stopped us again and started to act a little more normal by telling my friend who was driving that he needed to hear this. We're trying to cut him off and tell him, look, dude, you're obviously crazy. We don't want to hear it. But he starts talking to my friend about how reptilian shapeshifters are all around us and we need to leave right away and go back the way we came because it's not safe. Even though he seemed completely crazy and out of his mind, there was something very creepy about him. Some people you meet and talk to just give you a bad vibe. It's not that he was bad, but he just gave off vibes that weren't very good. We had to leave because they were so uncomfortable. I know that this isn't necessarily a sighting or an encounter, but it made all of us feel very uneasy. You may already know about the Kushtaka. They are like skinwalkers in Alaska, but they have a different name. They are still just as scary and creepy, though. I've had a lot of problems with them, but this one keeps coming back to me. On a 4-wheel drive trip up to Juneau, my best friend and I stopped by a lake to take some pictures. We hung out by the lake for about an hour before getting back in our little blue truck and driving down the road. Now it was getting dark. So I turned on my dome light to get ready for us to leave again. As I looked over at my friend Kaylin, who was sitting in her seat and seemed to be looking for something with her door, I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. It covered up half of you and made it impossible for me to see what she was doing. I sat there for a second and watched as I caught a glimpse of something moving again out of the corner of my eye. This time, it moved more, but it didn't make a sound, even though I could feel it shift its weight onto the edge that was facing me. Whatever it was stood there watching us, waiting to see what we would do next. At first, I thought it was a bear, but after a few seconds of sitting there in silence, I realized that neither the bear nor I would have. It had short, spiky hair that went all the way down its back, which looked very strange. It went outside just enough to let us know it was there. It had been hidden in the shadows by the trees, but it made itself known as if it wanted us to see it. It almost seemed like it wanted to scare us by showing itself to us. When the headlights first shone on this thing, Kaylin was still fumbling with something, and this thing let out a low growl and slowly bared its teeth. Then, it shifted its weight to the other foot and ran straight towards our truck. I told Kaylin in a loud voice that we had to leave right away. I was driving straight at this thing, but it jumped to the left before I could hit it. As Kaylin and I are screaming, we did a Hollywood-style 180, and this thing is nowhere to be seen. But we can hear it growling now, and it sounds like it's not far away. So I floated out of there, and we were back on the road in no time. But instead of taking a shortcut out of town, we went straight from my grandparents' house, where we could get out of town without having to go through any busy intersections. If that did happen, we were lucky that we didn't see or hear anything following us. What made this whole thing really scary was that it just stood there and watched us for a while before it finally moved. It was as if it had been watching us and waiting to see what we would do. Then, at the right time, it was as if it wanted us to know it was there and that it was going to scare us. That has always stuck with me, no matter how many years have passed. I never knew why an animal would do something like that. It's so strange. The only time that could even come close to happening is if the prey was trapped and couldn't get away. Worse still, Kaylin couldn't find her phone, and she thinks she left it at the lake where we were. I told her that we couldn't go back until the next day when it was light out, which is what we did. And it had a very spooky feeling, like this thing's energy was still around and it was still watching us, but we never heard any growls or other noises like that, or even tried to find it again. On top of everything else, we grabbed her phone and left faster than the first time. People here have told me that they have seen more than just bears in this area. Many more of these creatures. The Kush Taka. I wonder if they are really up there and if these things are really shapeshifters who can change into any animal or being they want at any time. So, that's my story, and you can agree or disagree with it. My story starts with my grandfather, who grew up in the house next to him. I learned everything I know about hunting and tracking animals while I was growing up, which is something that many people consider a great privilege. Every season, we went out together to hunt deer. It seemed like we caught one almost every time, and this is where my own experience comes in. So I need to go a little bit back. I remember being very young, maybe 3 years old, and my mom telling me that I would cry all night because I was scared of something that was bothering me. My parents didn't know what it could have been because all they saw was a black mass staring at them from the ceiling above my crib. It kept coming back, and then one day it wasn't there anymore. When my grandfather came in, he took care of his kids until my mom got home. He told me that I kept having nightmares, but nothing really bothered him until he tried to put a small blanket over me for bedtime and I went crazy, ripping the blanket out of his hands and yelling at him to get that thing away from me. He looked at my mom, who had told him about the other things I was going through. She thought it would be best not to tell him because he always scared me more when he heard stories like this, thinking something bad was going to happen to me. He sent us outside, where I paced back and forth and asked what it wanted, warning them to leave if they didn't. I wouldn't do it either. He asked me what it looked like, but I couldn't say much about it other than what its eyes were like. They were big, black, and empty, kind of like a deer's butt. Not the same. Very, very dark. He said that he would get rid of it and that I should go inside with my mom while she got me ready for bed. She did what she always did when I had a bad dream, which was stay up with me until I fell asleep. But it didn't work this time. As soon as we were settled in my room, I saw something sitting at the end of my bed. It was almost hidden by the shadows, but I could still make out its shape. It got closer and closer to where I was lying until I couldn't take it any longer. I was calling out for my grandfather. My mom did everything she could to calm me down and make me feel safe again so we could both try to sleep, but she finally gave up and left for the rest of the night. Now, after I went to sleep, my grandfather came back inside, following what could only be described as a very large dog-like human with fiery red eyes. He left until he saw it, Lee. When he came back in, I heard him tell my mom that something seemed to be bothering me. So he looked around the house, but he couldn't find anything. When I was 7, this happened again, but this time it followed us home. We kind of lived in the middle of the woods. So there wasn't really anywhere to hide outside or inside, since there was always a group of rabid animals waiting for you outside. That's when we decided that maybe our best chance was to try to find someone who had just moved to a different house in the country but still found us. We would leave for weeks at a time to try to get rid of it, but no one could. I know what you're thinking, but no, we never saw what was following us. Only that same black mass that kept following us around. And right when it seemed like there was no way out, things got even more strange. I finally opened my eyes. My mom told me that I started packing up my things while she was sleeping, after I had been afraid to move or even speak for days out of fear that it would hear me and come back if I did. She woke up and didn't know where I was or why until she heard me calling my grandfather in the other room. He asked me what I was doing, and all I could say was that I knew exactly what was going to happen. So all we had to do to get rid of it for good was go there. He tried to tell me not to worry about it anymore, but he couldn't argue with me when I told him why I knew where to find it. We were all able to sneak out of the house without that thing seeing or hearing us. The only reason I'm sure this worked is because nothing ever came into our house again after that night. When I think back on these memories as an adult, I just know that whatever it wasn't a demon from hell or anything like that. It wasn't something I could blame on a rare disease, a hallucination, or a mental illness, either. The only thing I know for sure is that 2 days later, it killed my grandfather. It almost looked like it just came to get what it wanted and didn't care about anything else. And I'm sure that if he hadn't made the deal with that one thing, I wouldn't even be typing out the story. Yes. We were supposed to go there to find this thing on that day. He must have made a deal with his entity that if it killed him, it would leave me alone. One life for another. He must have told my mom right after he did it, which is why I knew about it and how I did. I'm still not good at it. Even until now. I really miss my grandfather. I can only pray that it doesn't try to take my life again. When I probably saw or heard these things for the first time. Most likely, it was 2:30 a.m. I was walking home from a friend's house, and I had just bought some beer, so I figured, why not? We went through the whole case of it. As I walked back to my street, I could see two angry-looking guys in the corner. So, we drank our last sips and threw away the beers. I was walking by them when one of them grabbed me out of nowhere and threw me against a wall. I'm 52 years old and have about 100 pounds. They dragged me to an alley, but I kicked and screamed as long as I could until I heard what sounded like a gunshot, and then nothing. I didn't move because I thought that if I did, things would get worse. But when two more of them came up behind me, they let go of me and put something on my mouth that felt like duct tape. They carried me for a few blocks, and I heard something big. I don't know what it was, but it was loud. As we went along, they took me through an old, empty parking lot and threw me down next to two huge holes in the ground. One of the holes had a scary tree growing out of it. I couldn't get a good look at it or anything else because there were 4 or 5 of them standing around with guns pointed at me. One of them took my phone and made a call. They told us we had her. It was quiet until they all started laughing really loudly and screeching. Then they stopped and just looked at me. I couldn't see much of what they looked like, but once I realized it wasn't a person, I squeezed my eyes shut and didn't open them until I heard one of them say, "Okay, she's ready." All of them put their hands on me and started chanting in this strange language that sounded evil. All of their eyes were white, like they were rolled in the back of their heads. But it didn't have a pupil or an iris. It was very scary. After this happened, for a few seconds, they all moved back and stood still where the black smoke seemed to cover them all. And they start to come together and take the shape of a single dark figure standing in the shadows about 30 feet away. This strange tingling feeling went all the way up my body, making everything blurry, and I almost passed out. When I woke up a few hours later, I was covered in scratches and blood, but I wasn't tied down in any way. There was no duct tape, nothing. I ran for my life to my grandmother, who was crying hysterically and told me that a very powerful young skinwalker can take the form and shape of other people, several of them at the same time. He tried to take my soul from me. But for some reason, it can't. My grandmother told me that it's because she said a prayer over me to protect me, which stopped this skinwalker from taking my soul. Even though this happened a few years ago, I'm still scared to walk out late at night. When I was 6 years old, my family and I were sitting around a campfire when a skinwalker came down the road. I remember how strange it walked on its back legs, but it ran like any other animal. Its upper body was covered with long, black hair. And I remember that we were all sitting around the campfire, and I saw a big dog or animal running away in the distance. It stopped and turned to look at us. Somehow? My parents didn't end up seeing it, and I'm sorry this is so short, but it scared me and I don't have much to say about it. I just moved to White Bluffs, Washington, and my name is Cameron Browning. My mother wanted us to live near her parents, because they are getting older and need help. Now, I'm a very shy person, so I didn't want to leave my friends when we first moved here. They gave us a house that was already set up and let us stay there until school started again in the fall. I was at home by myself doing a lot of homework when we first moved here. It was about 4:30 p.m., so I decided to take a break and watch some TV before dinner. My grandmother, who works as a nurse, wouldn't be able to come over for another hour or so, if she decided to come over at all. Anyway, me being alone. It wasn't normal for me to watch TV because every time my mom or brother came home, they'd complain that I never watched TV with them. So this was a bit of a surprise. I just sat down on the couch and watched some old episodes of a show I couldn't even remember. I couldn't stop thinking about being alone in the house. Then, all of a sudden, it sounded like someone outside on the patio had dropped something very heavy. I was startled for a few seconds, so I went to the window by the couch to see if anything had really come into view. I can see what looks like two big wolves fighting over something as soon as I look out our window. The first thing I thought was that those things are huge and I should totally freak out. But as I looked closer, I couldn't help but keep looking. Something about them caught my eye, and I noticed that they were fighting over a dead dog. I moved away from the windows right away. I want to go see if my mom and brother are home yet, which they aren't because I just checked. By the way, I took out my phone and started looking up anything that might be related to what I had just seen, hoping it would help me figure out what was going on. After searching for about an hour on Google about wolves and other things like skinwalkers or whatever else I could think of at the time, I couldn't find anything that seemed to match what I had just seen with these things suddenly going away. Something now sounded like it was trying to open the door in the kitchen. I looked into it, and there didn't seem to be anything wrong. They just ran away, looking very scared and panicked. I tried to do my homework again. It wasn't going to work out now. Not long after that, there was a loud banging on one of the windows near the back. I turned around and screamed when I saw one of these big black wolves raise its paw to hit the window with it. It had big, glowing green eyes and the creepiest grin, like someone had sewn human lips onto a dog's face and put them on sideways. Its head was even worse. He was missing parts of his face and looked kind of scaly and dirty. So I called my mom right away to tell her what I had seen. She seemed really mad at me and kept asking me why I didn't do this or that. She scolded me for it instead of calling her all the time in a stern voice. All of these sounds were coming from almost every part of the house at this point. So I just decided to wait until someone got home, no matter how long it might take. I put down my phone, and right next to where I was standing, something broke one of her tall glass windows. This thing started growling at me and moved toward the broken window. I just stood there in shock and fear, not knowing what was going on. I knew I was probably going to die soon, but I couldn't move a muscle. It was now walking back and forth and growling at me with a huge grin on its face while it waited for me to make my next move. I don't know why I'd never thought of it before, but I grabbed my phone and called 911. I told them what was going on, and they thought I was joking, but they said they'd send someone out as soon as they could. Right then, the back window and the kitchen window both broke, and things started coming into the house. the big wolf was still grinning a lot. At that point, the only thing I could do was run straight for the basement door, which I did, slamming it behind me as soon as I got there. I ran down the stairs at full speed as 3 of these things had just come into our house. I ran to the other side of the basement and somehow managed to fit myself outside the small window that usually sits above the basement wall. You know which ones I mean, right? They're very small, but I'm pretty skinny, so I was able to squeeze my whole body through without too much help when my adrenaline was pumping. After I got out of the basement, it didn't take me long to start running down the street, waving my arms and yelling for help. Then, I think the officer was just walking down the street when he saw me. We talked, and he picked me up, took me back to the house, and went inside while telling me to stay. I didn't tell him who had broken in or why, but I did say that I thought I was going to get hurt. I told him how I got out, but when he went in, he said that no one was there, but he could see that the windows had been broken and that, according to what he said, several people had broken into the house and left long strands of black hair behind. This was one of the scariest things that has ever happened to me. After this, it took a long time for things to really calm down and get back to normal. If you don't know what a skinwalker is, these shapes could still be seen walking around outside my room at night. It seemed like they were waiting for the right time to come in and get me. It's basically a witch from Navajo mythology who can turn into any animal they want and whose own people have called them evil. They have done this since the beginning of time. They are known not only for being able to change their appearance, but also for hunting down and killing anyone who happens to meet one of their own kind. They have sometimes gone after whole families. Unfortunately, these things start to hunt them, and they become possessed or do something else terrible until they die. People say that skinwalkers can make all kinds of supernatural things happen. When they make noises that sound like poltergeists, they are an outside force. They are nothing to worry about. My name is Joanne, and my husband Nathan and I moved out to the country so we could try to get some peace and quiet after his sister died and everything else that has happened. But now, strange things are happening every day. We see strange lights in the sky, and I think an old Navajo witch is also trying to curse us and our family. I'm not going to lie. Since Nathan's sister died from cancer, we've been through a lot. We both just wanted to leave the city and do something different. A breath of fresh air for the mind. We chose this spot because it was close to people but far enough away that we could see the stars better. I don't know if you've ever been out here, but if you haven't, let me tell you that something is always going on at night. First of all, Nathan now stays up all night with his telescope, looking at space and trying to take pictures of it with his phone. He thinks that no one else can see them but him. It never really bothered me, but when I borrowed his phone for a second and looked in his photo album by accident, I had to ask him what he was looking at with his telescope. I would swear on the Bible that it wasn't a planet or a star. Talk about strange alien things going on in the sky. The first strange thing I remember seeing was when we were walking our dog at night. It was dark, and across a field, we could see 2 red eyes staring back at us. The strange thing about these eyes was that they didn't have any white around them like you would expect. They were like glowing embers that were just staring at me from the inside. Some kind of goat skull face or whatever crazy things hillbillies were doing at the time. But yeah, after that happened, we walked a little farther out into the field, and Nathan started yelling that he could see UFOs in the sky. When I look up, I always see something swirling around inside this bright white light in the sky, but it moves so quickly. Another time, I couldn't figure out what it was. After seeing that thing, we were lying on our backs and looking up at the stars when these bright red lights started to fly over us. They were going so fast that all you could see was a blur. They stopped right above us for a second and then just went away. All of this happened in just a few seconds. I think that whatever these UFOs or strange things in the sky are, they are caused by the people who walk around in this forest. What my husband believes are skinwalkers. I don't know if UFOs and skinwalkers are related, but my husband seems to think so. After that, we started hearing strange things in the middle of the night, and they always happened after we went to bed. The first thing we heard was a loud bang on a roof, which scared us to death. At the time, we didn't know what it could have been. Nathan goes outside one morning and sees footprints all around our house. So, when I got to work early one day, he asked me if I had been there before him. When he said this, I thought he was crazy. But when I went out there with him myself, it was true. Strange wolf prints were all over my car and porch. Even so, that's not even the most scary part. After that, people left all kinds of things around my car. For example, I came out one day and my side mirrors and windshield wipers were gone. I was really lost. It wasn't windy at all, I mean. So, who would steal those things off my car, or did they just blow there? I'm not sure. Nothing makes much sense. I found out why someone would do that in the end. But it's kind of weird that they would come to my car and try to steal something like that. Another time, Nathan comes home to find that all of the oil in his truck has leaked out. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal, but then we saw how much oil had leaked out. Nathan was pretty angry that the engine was almost on fire, but everything was fine. When we fixed it after a few weeks, we thought that was the end of it. But about 2 weeks later, Nathan was driving home from work and the truck started making really bad noises and then just died on him. We were so scared that we had to find out what was going on. It's even worse than we thought. When Nathan finally got his truck back, he told me he found all kinds of animal hair stuck in the engine, along with some other very suspicious things. I'll never forget how shocked he looked when he told me this. He showed me hairs that were covered in gunk but were long and stringy, like those of animals or a big wolf or something. But before I leave, I want to tell you another story. It's about my brother, though. Last year, his now fiancée lived with her sister in a townhouse right outside of Rexburg, Idaho. One morning when she got up, she saw something strange in the front yard. It looks like every grass blade was pushed to one side, making a path into the woods near their house. All 3 girls were scared, so they locked themselves in the townhouse for several hours until Nathan could come up from Salt Lake City. She was already planning to visit when he got there, but nothing happened that night or over the weekend. But when they went back to their home in Rexburg the next week, everything started happening again. At night, doors would randomly open and the lock and deadbolt would be mysteriously undone. They quickly got what they needed and locked themselves in a hotel room until they felt safe enough to go back home. It wasn't a thief because everything was still there and nothing was out of place. And the first night back, they try to stay up all night and watch TV. It will try to trick you with your eyes when you're tired. They didn't want this person to come in while they were sleeping. Just after 3 a.m., one of the girls was suddenly woken up by something. When she looked over at the door, she saw what Nathan had said was the scariest thing he'd ever seen. It wasn't a person who walked through the house. They looked like skinny white beings with rotting flesh falling off their bodies. Everyone was scared, yelled, and ran out of the house. Now, listen up. They found out that just a few miles from where they lived, there was an old Indian burial ground. I can't say for sure if that has anything to do with how strange things have been for them since then. I want to be shocked by anything. And when you think about what happened to us, it makes you really wonder. I had been spending the summer in the Huachuca Mountains, which is where the Coronado National Forest is. It's a beautiful place, and I loved going into the mountains at night to look at the stars and enjoy the beautiful scenery. On this night, that was what the forest and nature looked like. I felt very tired. After working all day. The sun was shining, the sky was clear, and there was a new moon. Except for the light from my campfire, it should have been pitch black outside. Around 9:30 p.m., I went to sleep in my tent. I always sleep with my knife close by because you never know what could happen out in the wilderness in San Diego County, where I've lived before. Since crazy things have happened to me, it always makes me feel safer. Call it a trick or something, but it works for me. A few hours later, I woke up because of something. Something hard and cold hit me in the face. I felt like there was something heavy on top of me. It was pressing so hard that it woke me up from a deep sleep. I was a bit scared because I didn't know what it was. When I opened my eyes, I saw the outline of a large man standing over me with his hands on both of my shoulders and pinning me down under him. He had a large knife pressed against my face, but not the blade, but the flat part. His head and face were hidden by darkness. My first instinct was to reach for my knife, which was luckily right next to my waist, holding the handle tightly in both hands with the blade pointed up at the mysterious man. I swung the knife up as hard as I could and got a sharp pain in my hand in return. I could feel water drip from the knife's handle onto my hands. When I looked up again, no one was there. He seemed to have vanished as if he had never been there. What happened next scares me the most about this whole thing, and the thought of it still keeps me up at night. My campfire burned down to embers at some point during the night while I slept, but miraculously started up again just as whatever or whoever had been on top of me disappeared without a trace. I didn't notice that something sharp had cut my hand until much later, when I looked down and saw a small chill of blood where the cut had been. I tried to make myself believe I hadn't had a bad dream and made it up. I kept looking around for it or him to come back, but he seemed to disappear after I stabbed him. The rest of the time I slept, though, I could feel like something or someone was watching me, waiting for the right time to come back and do it again. I didn't do anything silly. I put everything in boxes and started to leave. Even in the fire that was only crackling. Embers was now a roaring flame, as if his spirit or whatever energy he was turned into a rolling, burning fire. I should have put out a fire in general. I've noticed that people who have seen skinwalkers are afraid to tell their stories or get very angry and upset when asked. I get it, I do. I've been laughed at and made to feel bad about myself. Someone in my family was the one who told me about Skinwalker Ranch. At first, I didn't believe it, but now I'm sure that something very strange is happening in the Indian Hills, Kansas. Let me tell you a little bit about the area. Fort Scott is right in the middle of Kansas, between Joplin and Pittsburgh. It's not exactly a busy city with 5-star hotels and high-end shopping malls on every street corner. So when people say they don't want to live here anymore, you should know that people leave after their military deployment is over and they finish their season of seasonal work in St. Joe, which has one of the highest unemployment rates in the state. They often go home to St. Joe, where things have changed for the better. When they visit, they can tell that the two towns are different. Talking to people who have left Indian Hills for one reason or another, you'll find that most of them left because they didn't feel welcome there. I'll also tell you a bit about the history of the area. Back in the 1980s and 1990s, people thought they were living in the Satanic Panic era, when people were being hurt by satanic rituals in churches, schools, businesses, and everywhere else. The Yogi Bear campground was empty for many years until a church turned it into a different campground that is still in use today. In the 1990s, a farm with more than 80 acres and a house on it sold for only $4,000. This was because it had been left empty for a long time after reports of severe and violent ghost activity. Before it was reported in the late 1980s, people would say that they just didn't feel right there or that there was something wrong with the area, and nobody wanted to live there. In fact, the public records of the house show that neither a single person nor a family had lived there for more than a year at a time. All of them said the same thing, which was that there was a lot of violent poltergeist activity. What do I think is happening? Well, in 2010, a young man who said he was possessed set fire to an apartment building. After he burned down his parents' apartment, he moved in with his mother and sister to the complex. He left the building while it was on fire without getting hurt, and the next day he shot himself in front of his friends and classmates. The people who live there think this happened because ghosts were attacking them and he was possessed. But why would someone think that? Unless something really bad has moved into this place. As soon as the man killed himself. Several people said that at night, they saw shadows walking around their homes. People who say they have seen these things actually said these things in their own words. One woman said that she had seen people standing in her own backyard and staring into her house. She also said that one night she saw someone walk through her kitchen, but when she turned on the lights, no one was there. Another man said that he saw shadows all over his walls and ceiling. Every time he got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. He moved out of the state because he was afraid for his life, and the safety of his family. He thought that evil spirits were trying to take over him, or hurt him or his family. So, what went wrong? You might wonder if something really did happen here. Why didn't I know about it before? So, I live here, and this is where I grew up. Like many of you who are reading this now. I don't think it's a coincidence that hard times have hit the town hard and that some very strange and unlikely things have happened in such a small place as Indian Hills, Chile, the gateway to hell. I can't say for sure, but if nothing changes soon, we may all find out now that all covers the paranormal side of it. But what I wanted to talk about today was the Skinwalker part of it. Now, before you quickly dismiss this post and say that skinwalkers don't exist, think about it. Let me remind you that it has been said that the presence of skinwalkers will lead to a huge increase in paranormal activity. And I think that all of the strange things that happen in the area are caused by the ancient Indian burial grounds and other sightings of skinwalkers. Everything that would link back to the crazy, satanic ritual abuse and how everything is connected is partly because of the skinwalker activity. They keep the doors open. They are the ones who make everything happen, and they wait in the shadows to control everything like puppeteers, using demons and other evil things to do what they want and hurt people. They never have to come out of the shadows and show who they are. They can control, destroy, and get rid of a whole town's people with just their minions. Thanks for listening. I grew up about 30 miles northwest of Los Angeles. One of my favorite things to do is go hiking in the nearby mountains. When we were younger we would ride our dirt bikes. But as we got older, we switched to things like four-wheeling and hiking. When we were coming back down the mountain, we came to a clearing where a small town I didn't know about was just below us. We decided to stop and look more closely. We went down to get there. When we got off our bikes, we walked around and looked in windows. Suddenly, she saw something that caught her attention. It looked like someone was hanging from one of the building's roofs. When looked at more closely, it turned out to be nothing more than a fake. We found out quickly what was going on. Due to its remote location, the police station has been used to film horror movies. There, you can do anything you want and no one will ever know or care. It seems like it had been left alone for a while we figured out that the way things looked and what happened was a little bit scary. I think we heard a noise behind us that sounded like something big had just fallen. We saw what looked like a light coming from behind one of the houses. At first, I thought it was someone coming out of their house to see what was going on. But when we got closer, we never saw the person or light. We got close enough for me to see what it was and how it looked. It looked very strange. And in a way I can't explain without sounding crazy. This person wore a black hoodie and had dead eyes and skin that looked almost like plastic. I couldn't take my eyes off of him, and he moved away from us slowly, stopping about 15 feet away. It seemed like time had stopped, and all we could hear over our heavy breathing was the faint sound of crickets in the distance. It turned the light back on, but a light came from his body instead. And slowly, about 20 feet in front of us, he rose up as if he were levitating, and he started chanting all kinds of horrible, demonic things before exploding into a ball of light. From what I know and what I've learned, my friends and I ran as fast and as hard as we could without saying a word about what we had just seen. I think this was a skinwalker, but I'm not sure. I'm posting this in the hopes that someone can tell me for sure. In March 2015, this was seen in northern Idaho. I was on my way home after working late at a gas station. It was windy and snowy and cold. I turned the heat up as high as it would go in my car. Since there was several inches of snow on the roads, let my four-wheel drive take me home. As I drove down this road that leads to my neighborhood, I rounded a bend and saw something moving very quickly toward the road ahead of me. At first, it looked like an old man running around naked. He was skinny and wearing all black, but as I got closer in the car, I could see that his legs were much longer and thinner than they should be for a human. He also looked like he was running away and hopping around more than anything else. As I passed him, I kind of slowed down to take a look, and then I sped up and ran. As I walked by him, he turned into the woods right next to me. I will always remember this when I see him. He, or maybe I should say it, turned to look at me. It had the head of a coyote, but the body of a man and what I can only describe as black robes. He turned to look at me, then turned away and disappeared. I think I saw a shapeshifter and talked to one. I know they're real now that I've seen them. I live with my wife and kids near Manti, Utah. One night when I was younger in my early 20s, I was up late working on a vehicle in her driveway. When my dad came out to see what I was doing, I was surprised by his sudden arrival and instinctively pulled out my gun and pointed it at him. He saw the gun, told me to put it away, and told me to come inside. We had been sitting in our living room for a while when we heard wrestling outside. Someone was walking around outside the house. I didn't pay much attention to it because I thought that maybe one of our neighbors was over there or something. We didn't really think about it much until we heard two small growls coming from the window behind us. Now, I grew up on a farm in Nebraska, so I heard a lot of predators, but none of them sounded like this. I had never heard that noise made by that animal before. It sounded kind of creaky and growly. When I asked my father what the sound was, he said he didn't even hear it, even though I'd grown up in a place where I could recognize most animal sounds. I've never heard anything like that sound before. The longer we sat there and listened to these things happening outside, the more uncomfortable I felt. Something didn't feel right to me. But again, my dad said it was probably just our neighbors and suggested we go outside and check just in case. Surely, whatever was making the noises would be gone by now. After talking about the day for a while at the round kitchen table, we start to hear other noises and growls coming from outside that sound like something is in pain. We went out again to look into it, but we still didn't find anything. After that, whatever was making that noise seemed to have gone away for good. But it made me wonder if there are other things I don't know about in the world. Hello. First, I'd like to say that this happened in either 2007 or 2008. I'm not sure which, but I do remember that it was summer. I had just moved here from California so I could help my grandmother pay her bills and do other things. She was getting older and needed help around the house, so I would go to work with her during the day. Well, I woke up one night to what sounded like kids playing outside right outside my bedroom window. It was late, so I thought it might be the wind or something, but then all of a sudden it sounded like wood breaking and things crashing around. I sometimes get out of bed because I'm a hothead and think that some stupid kids are making trouble. After quickly getting dressed, I went outside to yell at the people who lived across the street from us. As soon as I opened the door to go outside, all of these things started growling. I could see two big black shapes huddled over something on the ground before I saw their green eyes from underneath. They're all together. There were 6 of them. I was so scared that I quickly went back inside and locked the door. After that, they went away. But every now and then at night, I would hear these voices coming from outside. I would hear this growling sound and what sounded like someone talking in hushed tones and whispers, as if they were speaking quickly. After a while, it stopped. But even now, when I sit here and think about what happened on that summer night, I still get chills. Because of this, I now like to stay inside, especially at night. Who knows what would have happened to me if I hadn't seen them and then walked out of the porch into the yard where they were. In 2009, in the fall, I met a skinwalker, or at least I think it was a skinwalker. I think so because my family has lived in the same house since 1874, when my great-great-grandfather Hector Montoya built it. We are from the High Meadows Pueblo tribe and live in Pueblo country, which is northwest New Mexico. We are surrounded by Native American reservations, so I think this animal came from there. Or maybe I'm just too young to know better. On a Thursday night, when my family and I went to bed around 10 p.m., everything was quiet. But strange things were still happening in the house. It had a buzzing sound and lights that kept going on and off that none of us could quite figure out. All of the electricity worked well. My parents said they would take care of it after they slept, but no one was ready for what happened next. At exactly 1:30 a.m. my little sister starts crying out for help. She was being hurt by something. She says that she felt someone or something jump onto her bed and try to choke her out while pulling on the skin of her face. She said she was so loudly screaming. She thought her life might be in danger. When my father ran into the room, he saw what looked like a shadow of a person by the window. Before he could get his gun, it jumped off the ground, ran up to the roof, and ran away at an incredible speed. Now, anyone who knows anything about skinwalkers knows that they are fast and can change into animals or, even worse, take on a spirit form. Even though I knew this, I didn't believe until a few weeks later, when we were all home alone watching movies on a Friday night. When the creature attacked again, my brother ran into it when he went outside to take care of our dogs, which were barking like crazy even though it was the middle of the night. He said he saw what looked like an animal run across her front yard and jump on top of our neighbor's house, which is about 50 feet away. When he went back inside to tell my father about it, they heard someone yelling at them through the window. This time, they saw what looked like a man with his face covered in red paint and blood and wearing some kind of animal skin. After what happened, we all kind of just sat there until about 3 a.m., not knowing what to do. We decided to use some raw meat as bait, but nothing came for almost 3 hours, so we thought it might have left. But when my little brother got up at 5 a.m. to go to school, we saw Auntie in our living room. My dad said that he just stood there and looked at it until he got the courage to pull out his gun and shoot it in the arm. We all heard a loud cry, so we thought it had left. After 10 minutes of silence, though, there was so much noise outside that every dog for miles around started barking like crazy. My sister looked out the window to see what was going on and told everyone to come look. She thought it might have changed into something else before running away. And by commotion, I mean police sirens, ambulances, fire trucks, and just about anything else. Whatever it was, it must have been bad. Nearby, you could see every kind of emergency vehicle you can think of. Strangely, My dad works for the tribal police, but none of them would tell him what had happened. They did say that a lot of people were hurt very badly or even killed. A couple of days later, a friend of my sister's who lived in the area told me that when she was walking her dog, she saw a large coyote with red eyes dragging a woman. Skinwalkers are creatures that are bad. In fact, they will do bad things with their powers, like hurting people mentally or physically to get them to do what they want. So, if one wants to do something bad, don't get in its way, because I guarantee it won't think twice about killing you. When this happened, I was in my early 20s. It was a very hot day with little wind and no clouds. I decided to go for a run along the bay near where I live. We saw a lot of strange lights over the water at night during this time of the year. My sister and I were out on my boat earlier in the week and saw some of these lights, which were amazing. I ran for about 30 minutes before I got to one of my favorite spots in the bay, where you can see seals, a lot of birds, and ships coming in and out of the ports. And they were even worse than usual because some big company was having a convention down by the docks, with lots of people making noise with their boats and laughing and drinking while trying to find a good place to sit and watch for a while before running back. I saw what looked like a person or animal standing on top of one of the medium-sized ships. As I watched it slowly make its way down the ship's side, I thought it would jump into the water at this point. I sat there for about 10 minutes and watched it swim around in the water. Every so often, it would go under the water and change into something even scarier. It would go back down, come back up, and change back into something that was part man and part something else. I have no idea. I watched this for about 25 minutes before I realized I was seeing a shapeshifter. I think this creature, whatever it was, must have been some kind of skinwalker. I'm Mary, and I'm writing this without giving my name. In 1999. At the time, my husband had been divorced for about a year from his first wife. They were having trouble with their oldest daughter, who was 12 at the time. To get rid of the bad habits they thought she had, they took her to a medicine man who lived on a California Indian reservation near San Diego. Every day during the summer, outside the house, there were dogs running around like crazy. So bad did it get that even my husband wanted to move closer to Poway, California, where he worked. After we moved to a new place, there were too many strange things going on for him to work from home. He went back to the north every week until school started to help his ex-wife until their daughter started school. One night when I woke up, I heard a buzzing sound right outside my front door. When I opened the door, there was nothing there but a bunch of dogs barking like crazy. I chose to sit at the table in my living room and look out the window toward our carport. Our living room had 5 big windows that looked out into the dark. I saw 3 huge black people with 2 legs walk by every other window. Arms move from side to side. I can't find the words to tell you how scared I was. Even though I didn't think it was a ghost, I knew it was 3 thieves who were planning to break in, steal, and who knows what else. To this day, I'm sure that's who I saw, but I didn't tell anyone. My husband woke up when he heard me running out the back door all by myself in the dark. When he heard them in the front yard, he probably got his gun and shot at them. When he did, they all got down on all 4s and ran away. He was aware of what they were. He had dealt with skinwalkers as a child, but we didn't talk about it again until his ex-wife told him that their daughter had seen someone who looked like her father, but she said it wasn't her dad because the person had yellow eyes and knocked on her window and asked her to let him in. He had a similar voice, but it was more distorted and squeaky, and the way he spoke was also different. What this girl saw scared her so much. She told her mother, but for a while she didn't tell anyone else. The medicine man wouldn't even let them ask questions because he said that if they did, demons would follow his daughter home. He says that these were also skinwalkers, and that after this event, they could take your DNA to turn into you and imitate you or do something else just as strange. Every time I heard dogs barking outside her house, my husband would start heading north again to help his ex-wife until their daughter got used to being back at school one night after he got home from working with him all day. I was on the couch sleeping. After reading a book, I fell asleep. He comes in and wakes me up to tell me that his daughter saw one of these things trying to attack the dog again outside. The daughter said the same thing, that something with yellow, piercing eyes took the shape of her father and ran away after almost killing the dog. Now it was making the house miserable. After that, none of the kids in the family could sleep, and they would spend the rest of the night afraid to close their eyes in their mom's bed. I want to keep myself from making fun of this family in any way. I know I can't do much, but I feel that by telling you about this today, I can help get the word out that these things are dangerous and can take the form of other people and animals to do whatever bad things they want. I just want some people to hear this and take it a little more seriously. Thank you. This happened early in the morning on January 1st. In 2017. At the time, I was driving with his girlfriend down I-5 south from California to Medford, Oregon. We were still about an hour north of Grants Pass at about 6 or 6:30 in the morning. We saw something big moving ahead of him on the road. At first, he thought it was a deer, since there are a lot of deer along that stretch of highway. But as they got closer, he saw that it was a creature heading straight for the highway. Before it got to them, though, it crossed back into the woods and was no longer seen. He wasn't sure what he had seen, and neither could his girlfriend. She just looked up and asked if everything was okay. Then, since she was tired from partying the night before, she went back to sleep in the passenger seat. He is only now willing to talk about what he saw because people who don't know about it didn't believe him and even put pressure on him. He still doesn't know what it is, but he's willing to hear ideas and theories about what he saw. I had to write this because I'm still not sure what just happened. Last year, my family and I were traveling around the country looking for a new place to live after Katrina caused us to lose our house in New Orleans. We found this cute little town that made me feel like I was back home. So we just did it right away. Something was different about this place, but it wasn't too strange. The people don't seem too bad. There were a lot of them whose families had lived there for generations, going back to the Civil War. They had some old and strange customs, such as burying their dead under their homes instead of in a cemetery near where they lived. But why not try something different? The town's name was Meadow, and it was just south of Little Rock. We found a piece of land with an old, empty house on it that was for sale. We decided to buy it and make it as good as we could. We didn't have much money, but we knew we wanted to find a place to live, and this seemed like the best option. Fixing up the place didn't seem too hard, either. In the end, there were only a few problems with the house. First, it smells like rot, probably from flood damage or something rotting in the walls. Second, there were strange scratches all over the floor and counters of the kitchen. The house was above ground, but the scariest thing was that there were what looked like claw marks on every door, even the ones that led outside. The claw marks scared me a little at first, but I got over it and told myself that maybe a stray animal was trying to get in or something. The scratching on the floor was also fine, but we ended up getting rid of all the rugs, which seemed to help keep any new scratching sounds to a minimum. We never heard them at night. Luckily, we found an old, broken-down chair with dust and spider webs sitting next to one of our couches. We put it in our bedroom because we didn't want it taking up space anywhere else. We found some clothes stuffed between the sofa cushions, but we didn't think much of it. Then things got really interesting. The first time I heard scratching, I didn't think much of it. I was sitting in bed and decided to take a shower. While I was in the shower, the doorknob started to shake, as if someone or something was trying to get in. Once I got back into the room, though, whoever or whatever was there left, and I didn't hear anything else until about a week later. When it comes to strange sounds. At 2:30 a.m., we all woke up to the sound of heavy footsteps, and the stairs in our room were shaking. I couldn't believe it was just one set of steps, though. We all heard it, even though my husband and son were in different rooms. The door then slammed shut. So we went downstairs to see what was going on. No one was there, but our things were all over the place, so we tried to put them back in order and then went back to sleep. This would be the only time something like this would happen all year, even in the winter when things usually got much worse. Then August came, and kids went back to school. For my boy, at least, things got back to normal. The sounds of scratching got louder and louder. Wake us up sometimes. I couldn't get up because I was too tired from work. Even though we heard the footsteps all night, none of us left our rooms to find out what was going on. Then, one night, things got even worse, if that's even possible, and as expected, the scratching started up again. But this time, different voices are coming out on top of it. It sounds almost like chanting or singing. I don't know how to say it any other way. After all, I'm not the type to believe in things like this. So we all ran downstairs, turned on every light we could, and waited together for whatever it was. Well, they never did, which is good, but the scratching got louder and then stopped. After that, we all felt eerie calm. We sat there for a while in silence before deciding to go back to bed. My son woke us all up around 6 in the morning because he had found a dead animal on the floor of his room. Someone must have broken in and put this dead coyote on the ground. Its throat was torn out. When I walked into the room, I heard him call my name. This was one of the strange things that happened, but at least leaving a dead animal in the room never happened again after this. Fast forward to February of this year. When I got home from work, my son ran through the front door and told me he had just seen something in her backyard before it ran off into the woods at the back of our property. I got him back inside right away, but when I went out there myself, no one was there except a new set of wolves for Prince, which he was leading straight into the thickest part of the woods. My husband spent about an hour looking out there with a flashlight and a gun. He came back shaking his head and told me that these paths did lead into the thicker part of the woods, but they ended suddenly, as if whatever they were just vanished into thin air. He looked at it and tried to find out more, but he couldn't find anything. After a couple of days with no more activity, my son told me that while I was at work, he heard a blood-curdling scream from outside the house. When he looked out the window, he saw a large coyote walking around on two legs, kind of limping, going in and out of the woods before disappearing again. I did my best to find out about the property and the house's history, but I didn't find much. But when I asked around, some people in our community told me that they've had trouble with Native Americans. I think that when this area was settled in the 1800s, there was a mass grave where hundreds and hundreds of Native American bodies were dumped. Since then, a lot of ghost sightings have been reported. Some people said they saw strange upright wolves running through the woods, and an older man told me that there was a big alpha male wolf spirit that was causing all the strange things to happen in the area, and it sounds like we saw it ourselves. I'm not sure what to make of all this right now. I spent many years on a ranch in northern Florida. I got lost while hunting one day in the fall. Since it was getting dark, I just laid down in an open area where I could see the stars. When all of a sudden, this upright coyote walks out of the woods, stops about 30 feet from me, turns back, and walks back into the woods as if nothing happened. It was pitch black and very scary. I will never forget it. But I don't understand why it turned around and casually walked back into the woods. Another strange thing is that it walked out of the woods before it went back in. I swore to God I heard a woman say in a strange way that you shouldn't have come this way. It made me feel cold. Even now, when I think about it, it sounded like an old woman's voice coming from an old AM radio. I don't know what was going on, but it was one of the scariest things that has ever happened to me. In 2009, during the winter, I worked at a gas station in Augusta, Maine, during the night shift. That year, I went hunting with a friend and my older brother. We were going coyote hunting. We didn't have a lot of money, so we didn't have a lot of tools. I only had a .22 rifle, and my friend had an old .30-30 because he didn't want me to carry mine because it shot farther. As we drove around looking for good spots, we came across some new tracks. It looks like 1 or 2 coyotes were there not long ago, but they are no longer there. Once we were in place, we waited for them for about an hour before we realized we might have been in the wrong place because there wasn't much going on. We decided to try our luck on the other side of the field. We drove through some brush and saw 2 coyotes in an area that had been torn up by them. Fighting one was way behind us, so I thought it would be easy for me to kill him since he was between us and my friend, who was ready to shoot if he needed to. We all shot at the same time, but only mine hit the target. My friend's shots seemed to bounce off the target. He had just bought that gun, and it didn't have any optics or iron sights. So, I told him not to worry. My coyote ran into the forest, and his friend ran in the opposite direction, up a hill, and into a thicket right next to a house. As we got closer, I could tell something wasn't right, but I thought it might just be nerves because my adrenaline was still going strong. I didn't notice anything was wrong until we were right next to it. The coyote looked nothing like a coyote. Its fur was darker, even in the moonlight, it looked almost black, and its face was very different, like it was deformed. It also moved in a very strange way. The night was quiet, and there were no crickets to be heard. We felt really bad about it. So, we just left it alone and didn't even try to catch it. We got in my truck and drove back to the gas station because we needed help finding something like that. We decided to turn around and go after it after about 15 minutes. 3 more times during the night, we went back out there. Even with the blood trail, they never found anything. I'm not sure what we saw that night, but I know it wasn't just a coyote. Since I was a child, I've been hunting, but I've never seen anything like that. It almost seemed like it was something else. Whatever it was, it might have been wearing a coyote skin to make us think it was a normal animal until we got too close. We had trouble with it for months before we even knew about it. My friend had nightmares for weeks about being chased through the woods by strange monsters. Now, about 2 years later, my friend came over to see how things were going while he was home on leave from the Navy. So I told him everything that happened. He always used his old gun to shoot at some tin cans. I told him about how I wanted to post it on Reddit. So he said he would write up something similar, but not nearly as bad as the first time he saw it. After he spent a few days with my family and me, he went back home. I decided to wait a few weeks before sending him a message to find out what had happened. 4 or 5 months had passed without hearing from him. I started making phone calls to see if anyone knew where he was. He wasn't taking his phone calls. I finally got in contact with one of his friends who told me that they were out drinking with my buddy. And he cried because he had to see this strange thing again. He could not stop talking about it, it seems. He said that he had taken him home and made sure he was safe for the night. I mean, he wouldn't shut up about what had happened. Even kept pleading with his friend to go back with him. Even though we said we should have left it alone, his friend told me the next day that my friend had just vanished. Everything he owned was still at his parents' house, where he and his family had been staying. Nobody has seen or heard from him since. But I have the feeling that whatever we saw in those woods is the reason why. That's pretty much the gist of what happened between us and this skinwalker, or whatever you want to call it. It might seem like I'm making this all up. But after reading these stories online, it feels like there might be some truth behind them now. So now that you know how everything started, let me tell you about my friend, what he wrote, and his encounter with this awful thing. And keep in mind that my friend's post is very long and descriptive. So I've tried to sum it up into short paragraphs for easier reading. All of this happens over a period of 7 nights. Here you go. I was about 13 at the time. In southern New Hampshire, I got a part-time job at a gas station near an apple orchard. We had about 1,000 acres of woods behind our house. Because it was state game land, people were always dumping things there. So no hunters ever went back there to look for deer. So people took advantage of it to dump trash. At the time, my dad's best friend was in the Navy. He came to live with us after going through a bad divorce and coming back from mid-tour leave. So, he wanted to shoot something, so we went out there one night around midnight. He was holding his Ruger 1022. We got back there right before it got dark, thinking that anything still alive would be easy to shoot because there wouldn't be much light. After that, it wasn't long before we heard something big moving in the woods, but it didn't sound like a deer. So I was already getting ready for a battle. As soon as we heard it, it started moving around, and a very large black bear came out from behind some cover and just stared at us. It must have come to our area for the first time. I didn't know how dangerous we were compared to the people who had gotten rid of it before. So, my friend asked me if we could scare this thing away like we would a mountain lion. He saw that I told him no one night at his house while my heart was literally pounding out of my chest. I started having horrible thoughts right away. After about 30 seconds, though, this bear started to act differently. It wasn't acting like a normal black bear, and when you looked at it more closely, you could tell something was wrong because its eyes look more human than you could ever imagine. After giving us a strange look, it kind of just walked away. So by the second night after that, I just wanted to go home. But my friend said he had one more idea for us to try. He asked if it would be okay if we went up the hill behind our house to see how much more noise we could make without scaring away any animals. After saying sure and waiting about 10 minutes, he pulled out a big knife and said something like, "Let's hope this works." For his age, my friend was pretty strong. So, after walking over some rough terrain between the base of the hill and where we were, he started hacking at branches with his knife to make as much noise as possible. When he was done, he threw his knife to the ground, and we started shouting and clapping our hands at the top of our lungs. We didn't have to wait long before we heard leaves rustling far away and saw something big moving quickly up ahead. It was the same black bear that had attacked us before, but this time it was running after us and acting very mean. We went back to the house, and my friend told me that he was doing this on purpose to get what he thought was a skinwalker out of the woods. He told me that you don't usually try to make as much noise as possible when you're attracting game. But we were trying to get the skinwalker, which I was sure lived in those woods, to come out. I was right. If you notice that bear's eyes look different, it acted differently, and it came after us after we made that noise. I'm pretty sure we were dealing with a skinwalker. I don't know why, but after he told me this, I felt a little bit better, and he told me to get in the car with him after grabbing my dad's shotgun. At first, he seemed hesitant, but it seemed like what we were doing with our time might be against the law. He even told us that if we got caught, he'd pay for everything. We both agreed that if something came out of the woods to hurt us, it wouldn't help to try to load all the shells into the shotgun before it could do something bad. So instead, we decided to hit things with sticks and yell as loud as we could like we did last time, hoping it would work. When we got back up there, we saw something big moving around again, so we started hitting things as fast as we could and yelling. We stayed up there for about 20 more minutes before I begged him to take me back to the house so I could get away from whatever was out there that night. It scared me a lot, and it scared me even more when he said he heard something running between all the houses. What my friend was doing, I found out later, was making as much noise as he could to try to lure the skinwalker out into the open so he could kill it. I had no idea that he was a skinwalker hunter, which is what he called himself. But anyway, when my friend took me home after this, he and his family decided to go on vacation. He left town with his sons, leaving me alone at home. I started to feel really cold and saw shadows moving all over. Clearly, the skinwalker was getting his own back. In hindsight, I think it was calling bad spirits into the house. So, let's skip ahead a few days, and now my Navy friend is back. But no matter what has happened so far, I don't think anything could have prepared me for what I saw next as I carried a shotgun home through an alleyway between houses. I suddenly saw shadows and haziness that looked like they were following me. What I saw didn't look like a man, a woman, or any other normal living thing. But all of my senses told me to run as fast as I could without looking back. It looked like it was reaching for me, but I heard my friend yell. He was close by and shot at it, hitting it before it ran away. This thing isn't human, and if what people say is true, it doesn't need our help at all. It already knows everything about this world there is to know. In the end, everything that happens and what happens before we die is supernatural. I don't want to think that things like this could be real. But the fact that it can change into a bear or a person or anything else it wants is shocking and scary. This was the first time I realized that skinwalkers and things that go bump in the night are real.